There is a flour with more calories than wheat. The fat in it matches olive oil. It grows on trees across every temperate forest on Earth. No planting, no irrigation, no seed purchase. Indigenous nations built civilizations on it. Korean street vendors sell it today. Then the milling industry rose to power, and this flour vanished. And at the end of this video, you will know how to make it yourself for free. Hi, I am Harry, and this is Garden Explained with Harry. Walk into any traditional market in Seoul tonight. Find the stall selling dotori guk. Watch the vendors slice brown blocks of jelly into bowls and dress them with sesame oil and soy sauce. This is not a health trend. This is not a wellness product launched last year. Korean families have eaten this for centuries. The flour that makes it comes from a tree. The same flour appears in noodle dishes across the Korean countryside. Grocery stores in Busan and Daegu stock it on shelves beside rice flour and potato starch. 500 million people across East Asia know exactly what this is. Most Westerners have never heard of it. In Japan, rural communities in the mountainous Nagano prefecture still make tochi mochi. They harvest from the trees every autumn, process the raw material using cold stream water, and fold the resulting paste into rice cakes. The tradition predates written Japanese history. Families pass the processing knowledge from grandmother to granddaughter. The technique has not changed in 1,000 years because it does not need to change. Now go back further. Before Europeans arrived in California, the Miwok people of the Sierra Nevada foothills built their entire food economy around this flour. The Pomo along the northern coast did the same. The Yokuts in the Central Valley. The Ohlone along the San Francisco Bay. These were not small wandering bands. These were complex societies with permanent villages, trade networks, and stored food surpluses. The single most important calorie source in their diet was not corn, not wheat, not rice. It was a flour made from something that fell from trees that nobody planted and nobody owned. In Spain, during the famines of the 18th century, peasant families in Extremadura and Andalusia survived on bread made from this same source. In Portugal, communities in the Algarve baked with it into the 1900s. In Sardinia, Italian villagers made flatbread from it during both world wars. In the mountains of Bosnia, families stored the raw material in river baskets through winter. 3 continents, thousands of years, hundreds of distinct cultures, all of them using the same flour from the same source. And somehow the average person watching this video right now has never made it. That gap is not an accident. The source is white oak, Quercus alba, and its close relatives. The tree growing in parks, backyards, along highways, and in public forests across most of the eastern United States, through the Midwest and into southern Canada. It grows across England, France, Spain, and Central Europe. It is one of the most common hardwood trees in the Northern Hemisphere. Every autumn, a mature white oak drops between 50 and 100 pounds of acorns onto the ground. The squirrels take some, the deer take some, the rest sit there and rot. Nobody picks them up, nobody processes them, nobody turns them into the flour that fed civilizations. Here is why white oak matters specifically. There are 2 broad families of oak in North America, white oaks and red oaks. Both produce acorns. Both acorns contain tannins, which are bitter compounds that make raw acorns unpleasant and potentially harmful to eat in large quantities. But the tannin content is not equal. Red oak acorns contain 8 to 15% tannin by dry weight. White oak acorns contain 2 to 6%. That difference changes everything. Tannin is the single barrier between a raw acorn and edible flour. Remove the tannin and you have food. White oak acorns can be processed to remove that tannin in roughly 3 days using nothing but cold water. Red oak takes weeks. The distinction is the difference between a practical home food source and a research curiosity. This is why Korean food producers use species with lower tannin content. This is why the Miwok preferred certain oaks over others. The knowledge is ancient. The chemistry confirms what grandmothers already knew. Now consider what this flower actually contains. The caloric density ranges between 380 and 500 calories per 100 grams, depending on the species. That is comparable to wheat flour on the carbohydrate side, but unlike wheat flour, acorn flour contains 18 to 30% fat. The dominant fat is oleic acid. That is the exact same monounsaturated fat that made olive oil the centerpiece of every heart health recommendation for the last 40 years. You are looking at a flour that delivers energy like a grain and fat, like olive oil, from a single source that falls from a tree for free. The protein content sits between 5 and 8%, lower than wheat. But combined with the fat and carbohydrate content, acorn flour is one of the most calorically complete single ingredients available from any wild source. No crop rotation needed, no soil amendments, no planting season. A white oak begins producing acorns around 20 years of age and continues for 300 years or more. 3 centuries of free flour from one tree, no annual purchase, no input cost, no dependency on any supply chain or any company. And that is the problem, not for you. For the industry that sells you flour. In the 1800s, grain milling in America transformed. Small local mills that served farming communities gave way to massive centralized operations. Pillsbury built its first major mill in Minneapolis in 1869. Within 2 decades, roller milling technology replaced stone grinding. The new system could process wheat at industrial scale, producing uniform white flour that could be packaged, branded, and shipped across the country by rail. This new model required specific characteristics from its raw material. The grain had to be planted annually, so farmers would buy seed every year. It had to be storable for months without spoiling, so it could survive long rail shipments and warehouse storage. It had to require processing equipment that consumers could not replicate at home, so the mill remained essential. Wheat met every one of these requirements perfectly. Corn met them. Rye met them. Acorn flour met none of them. The raw material grew wild and free on public land. It required no annual seed purchase. The processing could be done with a rock, a bucket, and cold water. And the high-fat content that made it so nutritionally valuable also meant it went rancid faster than grain flour in unrefrigerated storage. That last point is the one agricultural textbooks always emphasize. They call it a limitation, but think about who that limitation actually affected. A family with a cool cellar or a cold stream had no problem storing acorn flour through winter. The Miwok did it. The Koreans did it. The Bosnians did it. The storage problem was not a problem for the home processor. It was a problem for the industrial shipper. It was a problem for the company that needed flour to survive 6 weeks in an unrefrigerated rail car crossing the Great Plains in July. The limitation was not a property of the food. It was a property of the business model, and the business model won. The naming did the rest. In English, acorn flour carried no commercial identity. It was called peasant food, famine food, survival food, Indian food, spoken with the dismissiveness that colonial language always carried. No brand could be built on shame. No advertising campaign could overcome the association with poverty and desperation. The milling companies did not need to launch a campaign against Acorn flour. They just needed to offer something that felt modern. White wheat flour in a paper sack with a printed label. Clean, civilized, progressive. The culture did the erasing on its own. Search any major research database today. Type wheat flour nutrition. You will find thousands of studies funded by agricultural companies, grain boards, and food manufacturers. Now type Acorn flour nutrition. You will find a few dozen, mostly from Korean food science programs and a handful of Mediterranean researchers in Portugal and Spain. The ratio tells you everything. Not about which flour is better, about which flour has money behind it. The same pattern appears everywhere this channel has looked. A self-seeding plant that produces omega-3 gets 400 studies, while fish oil gets 15,000. White clover disappears from lawn seed mixes, so herbicide companies can sell poison to kill it. A tree that drops free flour for 300 years gets ignored, while annual grain crops generate $60 billion in global seed sales every year. The pattern is not conspiracy. It is arithmetic. Things that cannot be sold cannot be marketed. Things that cannot be marketed do not enter public awareness. 3 generations grew up buying flour in bags without ever knowing it was falling from the trees in their own neighborhoods. But you can break that chain this autumn. Here is exactly how. Start by identifying white oaks near you. The leaves are the giveaway. White oak leaves have rounded lobes with smooth edges. Red oak leaves have pointed lobes with tiny bristle tips. If the lobes are rounded, you are looking at a white oak. If you are in the eastern United States, white oaks grow in nearly every county from Maine to Florida and west to Minnesota and Texas. In Europe, English oak and sessile oak follow the same processing rules. Gather acorns from the ground after they fall naturally in September or October. Do not pick them from the tree. Fallen acorns have matured fully. Bring them home and do the float test. Fill a bucket with water and drop the acorns in. Any acorn that floats has worm damage or air pockets inside. Discard the floaters. Keep every acorn that sinks. Crack the shells. A standard nutcracker works. A flat rock works. A vise works. Remove the nut meat from inside. Some will have a thin, papery skin. Remove that too if you can, though small amounts will not affect the final product. Collect the nut meat in a bowl. Grind the nut meat into a coarse meal. A blender works. A food processor works. A hand grain mill works. You are not trying to make fine flour yet. You are making a rough meal that water can flow through. Now, leach. This is the step that removes the tannins and turns bitter raw acorn into mild, sweet flour. Place the ground meal in a jar or bowl. Cover it with cold water. Let it sit. After 8 to 12 hours, pour off the brown water. Replace it with fresh cold water. Repeat this 2 to 3 times per day. With white oak acorns, the water will turn brown at first, then amber, then pale, then nearly clear. After 2 to 3 days, taste a small pinch of the meal. If it is still bitter, continue leaching. If the bitterness is gone, you are done. The meal is now edible. Spread the wet meal on baking sheets or dehydrator trays. Dry it at the lowest temperature your oven allows, or use a food dehydrator or spread it in the sun on a dry day. Once the meal is completely dry, grind it one more time in a blender or grain mill. Now you have fine acorn flour. Use it in flatbreads. Use it in pancakes. Stir it into porridge. Use it as a thickener for soups and stews. It will not rise like wheat flour because it contains no gluten. For bread, mix it 50-50 with wheat flour. For everything else, use it straight. The flavor is mild, slightly sweet, with a richness that comes from the fat content. Korean cooks describe it as earthy and clean. California indigenous food preparers describe it as nutty and filling. You will understand both descriptions after your first batch. One mature white oak, one autumn afternoon with a bucket, 3 days of soaking in cold water, and you have flour that cost you nothing, flour that no company produced, flour that no truck delivered, flour from a tree that will keep producing for another 200 years without you doing anything at all. The global wheat flour market generates over $200 billion every year. Every dollar depends on a consumer driving to a store and buying a bag of flour made from a crop that required plowing, planting, fertilizing, irrigating, harvesting, threshing, milling, packaging, and shipping. Every dollar depends on that consumer never looking up at the oak tree in the parking lot and realizing what is falling from its branches every October. The acorns are falling right now. They are falling in backyards in Virginia. They are falling in public parks in Ohio. They are falling along walking trails in Pennsylvania. They are falling on sidewalks in London and on hillsides in Andalusia and in temple courtyards in Kyoto. They are falling by the billions across the Northern Hemisphere. And tonight, almost all of them will rot where they land while the people walking over them drive home and open a bag of flour that someone else made, someone else shipped, and someone else profited from. The trees do not care about profit margins. They have been dropping this flour for 10,000 years. They will drop it again next October. The only thing that changed is that someone convinced you it was not food.